Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I would like to discuss service topping and service bottoming. This is something that very much goes along with one of my previous videos where I talked about the phrase topping from the bottom. So if you haven't seen it already, I do recommend you check it out, and I will put a link for it in the description box below if you haven't seen it already. Now this is definitely a video that can stand on its own, so you don't need to watch that video. It's just a good way of getting some background and getting more perspective on this before I get into today's topic. And what I would like to talk about here is specifically how people use the terms service top and service bottom, where it comes from, what it means, and how it relates generally to the roles and titles that we use to describe what we do in BDSM, and just generally discuss what these things mean, because there does seem to be a lot of confusion about how to use this term, what it's implying about a particular person or a scene or a relationship, and I really just want to add some clarity there, which hopefully will be the result of this video. Well, before I get too deep into it, I do just want to first lay down some basic groundwork, some basic terminology to make sure that we are all coming from a similar place of understanding, especially if you haven't seen any of my other videos before. I will leave links to the videos where I discuss these more in depth in the description box below. There are two camps that you can roughly divide BDSM practitioners into, or the titles and roles that we assign to BDSM practitioners. On one side, you have the people who are engaging in power exchange. These titles are most commonly dominants and submissives, although there are 1.5 million different titles that each one of those particular categories could have. Dominant could be somebody who is a master, a sir, a lord, a daddy dom, a mommy. You have somebody who is a submissive, who is a slave, a pet, a little, and even a number of different things. So there's tons of different subcategories all within just being a dominant or being a submissive. But what makes all of these roles similar and all these titles similar is that they are engaging in power exchange in some way. Generally speaking, there are people as well who are littles or pets who don't do power exchange, but they're much less common, and I'm not going to get into that in this particular video. But the people who fall on this side of the slash, whatever they're called, engage in some sort of power exchange, engage in some sort of authority transfer. So what that means is that the submissive is giving up power to the dominant, and the dominant is receiving power from the submissive. Now on the other side, you have people who are tops and bottoms. These have less names, generally speaking. They will just be a top or a bottom. They may have a specific role that they play. Maybe they are a spanky or a spanko, somebody who really enjoys spanking but doesn't necessarily involve power exchange. You could have somebody who is a hedonist. You could have somebody who is a fetishist, and they're engaging in BDSM activities without the power exchange element. And so how that ends up playing out is a top just means somebody who is performing the action, and a bottom is somebody who is receiving the action. It's very similar to how the terms are used in like a larger sexual context, particularly in the LGBT community, but it does have its own specific meaning within BDSM. So those are generally the two categories of types of people who are engaging in BDSM. You have people who are engaging in power exchange on one side, and people who aren't on the other, although person to person, situation to situation, you have people who cross back and forth between the two, and that's perfectly reasonable and perfectly normal. But where does a service top or a service bottom fit into these two dynamics? And that is the question that I want to help answer today, because a lot like the phrase topping from the bottom, which is implying that somebody who is actually receiving the action is the one who's controlling the action in a power exchange or in a scene or in a situation of some kind. The term service top is implying somebody who is claiming that they are a dominant is actually really only doing it and only following the orders of the person who is acting out the submissive role or who is behaving as the bottom in the scene. It's used very much in a derogatory way. It's a way of poking, particularly at newer doms who haven't quite found their footing yet. It can be a way of deriding the way that a submissive and a dominant interact, or the way that a top and a bottom interact. And it's something, honestly, that I see less often used as a way of dismissing the top or the dominant, but more as a way of even putting down the bottom or the submissive. So often it gets used something along the lines of, oh, you just want a service top, you don't want a real dom. Oh, you don't want to listen to me, I guess what you're really looking for is a service top. Basically, what it's used as is a way of degrading the submissive for not wanting the level of power exchange, or typically not wanting the kind of scene or not wanting the kind of energy that the dominant or top is asking for. So it's used as a way of putting down submissives and saying, if you were a real submissive and you wanted a real dom, you would listen more. And that's not really how it works, but that's the most common way that I've seen it used in a derogatory fashion, is to put down submissives and tell them to just shut up and behave because they're submissive and that's what they should be doing, which is wrong on so many levels. And it's one of those things where it's like, why do we even... I wish we didn't need to have this conversation, but just be aware that it's out there. It's okay if you're a submissive and you're a bottom and you're very authoritative with what you want in a scene, you have very firm limits and boundaries. Those things are okay. You just need to make sure that you fully negotiate that with your partner and that you fully understand the level of power exchanges you're wanting in your scenes and in your relationships and things like that. But moving on from that point, I would like to discuss the actual positive, affirmative use of using terms like service top and service bottom, because besides just being used for a derogatory statement, they are actual roles that people fulfill in BDSM. And the way that I would think about a service top specifically is somebody who is providing a BDSM scene, the person who is performing the action and planning out the scene, who is doing it primarily, if not exclusively, to the benefit and with the instructions of the person who will be receiving that action. So for example, somebody who is a service top may approach somebody that they want to play with, or somebody will approach them who wants to play with them, and they'll figure out a scene that they want to do together. And the submissive or the bottom will say, oh, I'm like so excited to be able to play with you. I have seen you do scenes before. I would really, really love it if we did a scene where I was tied up and you blindfolded me and you spanked me and you called me a dirty girl. And the person who is going to be performing the service top role will go, well, it doesn't really seem anything particularly like I would want. It's not necessarily going to make me personally feel dominant in my role, but I'm willing to do it because it makes you happy and it's within my limits, or it brings you some kind of pleasure or erotic charge. And this is key. Somebody who is a service top or a service bottom is still acting completely within their limits and their boundaries, and they still have access to safe words and aftercare if they need them. It's not so much that they're doing things that are outside of their limits, it's that they're doing things they don't derive the same level of pleasure for, or that they don't derive their own personal dominant or submissive energy as it happens to be. It's something that they're willing to do in order to accommodate a partner, in order to make somebody else feel happy and fulfilled, in order to get somebody off or to cause somebody to have an orgasm, but it's not something that they are personally going to get a lot of pleasure out of. To make an analogy to real life experiences, this would be like going on a date with somebody and they really, really like sushi. So you agree to go to a sushi bar, even though you don't really like sushi, you're not allergic to it, it doesn't make you throw up, you're just not really enthused about it. But you really want to be able to go on a date with this person, or you really like just enjoying their company, so you're willing to go out and have sushi with them, even if it wouldn't be your first choice for that type of scene, or if it wouldn't bring the same kind of pleasure of going out for Mexican food or Italian food would. This is very similar to people who are pro-doms. A pro-dom is functionally a service top. Not all service tops are pro-doms, but basically what a pro-dom is doing is they are creating a scene, they are creating energy to the exact specifications of what the submissive wants, as long as it's within what they are allowed to do physically, mentally, emotionally as a pro-dom. Not all service tops are pro-doms. You can have instances and scenes where somebody is acting as a service top, even if in their everyday kink life they are purely dominant and they're in 24/7 total power exchange relationships where they are in complete control of everything. And service topping doesn't have to be something that's actually revolving around a real scene, shall we call it. It can also be something that's very commonly used for demos. It can also be something that is used at taster parties. And basically what that ends up looking like is you'll have somebody who is willing to perform an action on somebody in order to give them a taste of what that particular type of energy is like, be that electroplay, spanking, rope bondage, needles, whatever it is. It's something where they're not personally going to get any dominant charge out of it. It's more of a teaching experience, a mentoring experience, a learning experience. Now, if you're trying to figure out a way so that you can tell the difference between something that is a dominant action or a topping action versus a service topping action, is figuring out where the directive for the play is coming from. Is the dominant or the top having authority to make the decisions? Are they involving things that they personally get a lot of satisfaction out of? Or are they purely going off of the directions and whims of the submissive or of the bottom? This isn't to say that a dominant or a top can't create a scene or some kind of energy where they are doing exactly what the submissive likes. Ideally, in a good BDSM relationship, you'll have enough overlap to where most of the scenes are not only things that the dominant likes, but that the submissive likes, and you combine those two things together. But if the dominant, again, is not getting any of their own personal energy needs met in terms of dominance or topping from the scene, and their primary, if not sole directive, is the pleasure of the other person, that is what makes something service topping as opposed to regular topping or dominance. Now, I do realize that over the course of this video, I have been mentioning service bottoming, but most of my language has been around service topping. And honestly, that's because there's even less information out there about what being a service bottom is. It's very much like being a pro submissive. It's something that happens theoretically, but not very often, and so there's not a lot of resources out there about it. What I would say for service bottoming specifically is that it is very much like service topping, and that the bottom is not necessarily getting anything out of it, and they are doing it primarily at the will of the dominant and the top. It's a lot trickier to do though, because you are still the one receiving an action, so you have to be even more careful that because this is something that you are not personally getting a level of submissive satisfaction out of, that you are not having your limit stepped on, that you still have access to safe words, and that you're going to be in an emotionally and mentally secure place when that scene is over. A common way that people do service bottoming is when there are new tops in the scene and they are willing to do scenes with them on just like a trial basis, so that way they can get their own feet under them and figure out more about what their dominance looks like and what their particular style is. The submissive may not be engaged enough to be able to... The submissive may not be emotionally engaged enough, and then their submissive headspace enough to be able to do more of a collaborative type of experience. They may just be, okay, you're a new top, what is something that you would like to do? And then the top is like, oh, I would really love to be able to tie you up and spank you. And then the person who's going to be a service bottom goes, well, I'm not really that into bondage, and spanking isn't usually my thing, but I'm willing to try it out for you so that way you can see what this experience is going to be like. Something else that's very common for service bottoms to do is when they're in a total power exchange relationship, or when they are in a relationship that involves some kind of authority transfer. And I know it seems kind of counterintuitive to think of somebody who has a very high level of power exchange as being a service bottom, because they can kind of be seen as opposite sides of the spectrum, but hear me out for a moment here. Because what a service bottom would be doing in that particular situation is what I would call suffering for master, or suffering for my dom. It's something where you are able to consent to it. You can even enthusiastically consent to it, and it's something that, again, I'm going to keep saying this, is within your limits and within your boundaries, but it's not something that you are getting a personal charge off of. It's something that is purely for the pleasure of your other partner. And in a DS relationship, I think things like this are very important, because it's reinforcing your position as a submissive, that you do not get to always make all the shots, and not everything that you get to do will be your favorite thing ever. Sometimes being able to serve your dominant and being a good submissive means being able to put what you love secondary to what your dominant would prefer. And this shouldn't be something that you do in every single scene, because ultimately the submissive or the slave will not be fulfilled in that type of dynamic. But again, it can be very powerful as a submissive to go through a scene that you know is purely for the pleasure of your partner, and you are suffering for them. This is something I actually do quite often with impact play. It's one of my primary ways I do impact play, because I am not a natural born masochist, but a lot of my partners, both currently and in the past, have been sadists. So even though I don't personally get a lot of charge off of doing an impact play scene, I really enjoy how it makes my partners feel. I really enjoy the energy of it and the charge that they get off of it as a dominant person. And so I'm willing to do that, even though it isn't something that I would typically choose to do on my own, because of how it makes my partner feel and how it reinforces my position as the submissive in the dynamic. But anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about in today's video. Hopefully you guys found this interesting and helpful. If you guys have any comments or questions, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. If you guys want to, and you haven't already, I do recommend subscribing. I make videos twice a week. If you guys really like this video and you want to be able to help me travel more and go to conventions and do all sorts of crazy fun videos, I would recommend you check out my Patreon. I will put a link to that down in the description box below. I have tons of cool chats and exclusive features and videos and photo shoots and stuff, so if you want to check that out, please do. And until I see you guys again, I hope you get the rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.